welcome to the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre's first masterclass of 2021. Before we kick anything off, can I please ask that everyone just keeps their microphones on mute until we get to the Q&A a little bit later on. I think most of your mute buttons should have been turned on when you entered the room. My name is Sarah Robertson and I will be hosting tonight's masterclass with our wonderful panel. I'm the Marketing, Communications and Events Manager here at MEC, and on behalf of the team, including the teams from MAP and TRAM, thanks very much for coming along. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country where I'm broadcasting to you from today, Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. And I'd encourage you to pay respects to the traditional owners of the lands you're on tonight, wherever you are in Victoria or Australia. So for tonight's masterclass on resilience and wellbeing in business, we are going to explore what resilience and wellbeing looks like in the current climate, how to implement strategies to improve resilience and wellbeing in your personal life, and how being an effective leader of yourself can have an impact at work. So the way tonight is going to work is after we've finished off some intros, we'll have a panel discussion for around half an hour or so, and we will open up the floor to questions taking us through till roughly 6:30 p.m. So with that in mind, I would like to welcome our three panelists for this evening, Samantha Dow, Valerie Judge and Nicholas Van Dam. So as I'm just going through, I'm just going to pin everybody's videos so that you can see all of us. So there we go, we've got Sam and we've got Nicholas. There we go. So Sam is currently Head of People and Culture at Catholic Education Sandhurst and has over 25 years experience as a HR professional, most recently at Bendigo Bank. Sam is also a founder, having run her own HR consulting business and setting up a yoga retreat. She's also a yoga and meditation teacher, and I've had the pleasure of joining Sam on the mat. Valerie is the Managing Director and Founder at Edgeperience and Rose Phoenix, and is also a graduate of the Master of Entrepreneurship program run by our friends over at the Wade Institute. Valerie is uniquely qualified to support startups and small businesses, having extensive education and experience as both an entrepreneur and mental health professional. Nicholas is the Inaugural Director of the Contemplative Studies Centre at the University of Melbourne, soon to be our neighbours at Melbourne Connect. He is a psychologist and a senior lecturer in clinical psychology at the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. Nicholas's research program includes exploration of ways that meditation and mindfulness practices can support wellbeing, as well as improved understanding and treatment of high prevalence psychiatric disorders. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to kick off by asking each of you, what is happening in your lives right now that's testing your resilience?
Oh, I'm happy to jump in first.
Go for it.
First off the rank. So look, for myself as a mental health professional, I've recently pivoted to being a founder and a small business owner. And I'm sure that I'm not alone in saying that these past 18 months have been a bit of a challenge for all of us. And that's on top of the day-to-day runnings of a business or a startup. But I thought I'd like to share with you two things, and one of them is related to my business and one's related to my personal life. With regards to my business, one of the things that's really been testing my resilience at the moment is that I recently closed a company and I have recently started a company. So that's certainly been seeing my resilience pop into play there, and a little bit of stress. And I think on a personal level, which I'm sure most of you will probably resonate with, is it's been pretty tough not seeing family and friends and sort of seeing the, my little nieces and nephews growing up. So that's hard because they sort of help me find balance and that sort of joy. So it's a bit of a tough one at the moment.
Thanks for sharing, Valerie. Sam, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, So yeah, the last 18 months has been reasonably different for me too. This time last year I was unemployed. I took a package, a redundancy from Bendigo Bank actually, and took some time out, did a little bit of consulting. And now in January this year, started a whole new world in education, which very new industry for me in the HR world. But, you know, I am working at the moment 100% from home, and I am a true extrovert. I am energized by being around people. I have a couple of adult children living with me, and to be honest, they eat and then they go into their rooms. So the human interaction even with my kids is pretty minimal. My dad lives on his own in Ocean Grove. He's a bit older, has some health issues. So, you know, and my family are all in Melbourne. So same as everybody else. Just not being connected to humans as regularly as I would like is probably the biggest challenge. And I don't know about you guys, but the last few weeks have really taken a toll for many. And for the first time, I'm even thinking I'm a bit over this. That's probably the first time I've said that. So, and I'm cooking way too much, eating too much. I heard a stat, the average person's put on 10 kilos over the last 18 months. I think I'm on my way if I don't stop cooking and eating. That's it for me.
Thanks, Sam. And how about you, Nicholas?
I don't think I have anything especially unique to add. I mean, I think you know, if I think everything is testing me, and you know, it's if something weren't testing me, I think I wouldn't be human. So I mean, you know, as of March in this year, we sort of began to formally establish the Contemplative Study Centre. So it's been very strange, as I'm sure other people in the room sort of could commiserate with, sort of, you know, trying to hire people that you've potentially never met in person. So it's interesting to sort of meet all these new people and start a new venture and never actually physically get to interact with them. So that's been interesting. I think certainly having kids, I have a young son who's almost 6, and having to sort of, you know, juggle homeschooling with work has been an interesting challenge. And I think particularly for me, I mean, I'm from the US, and so most of my family's in the US. And so I haven't seen any of them since, I don't know, I think January 2019. And it sort of seems as if it's unlikely that I'll see them probably until early next year at the earliest. So it's proving challenging to sort of find new and creative ways to have Zoom calls and FaceTime calls and things like that with family members that don't sort of just rehash the same old things.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear from all of you that just like the rest of us mere mortals, everyone's struggling with resilience at the moment, which is kind of why we decided that having a masterclass on this topic at this point in time was going to be a really good idea. My personal resilience got tested today when my new mobile phone SIM got delivered to the wrong address, and my phone number got cut off as soon as that delivery was made, so I couldn't even call the courier to find out where the SIM had been delivered to. It's vaguely sorted out now. So before we go too much further, let's have a bit of a chat about how you would frame up resilience, how you would describe it to somebody else. Nicholas, would you care to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I mean, look, there's lots of different ways that sort of it's been talked about in a broad sort of scientific or academic context. I mean, the way that I generally think about it sort of is in this context of sort of, you know, the ability to bounce back or sort of flexibility. You know, we think of someone as resilient as sort of someone who, you know, can kind of get knocked down and get up again. You know, that sort of
There's a good song about that.
So I hear. But I guess I'd like to sort of also tweak that, and this is something that I think is particularly important. You know, I think that there is the concept of resilience. I think that it's taken on new meaning, and sort of it can be used kind of against people with this idea that, you know, you just need to be more resilient, and it sort of ends up being the thing that gets put on the individual. It's your responsibility to be resilient in the face of difficult times, and I think this context of this discussion tonight is really important to acknowledge that. You know, sometimes what resilience looks like is not necessarily getting back up straight away. You know, so we typically think about it as you get knocked over or you get the wind knocked out of you, you know, whether that's physically or emotionally, and you get back into it. Sometimes what you actually need is to stay down for a few extra seconds or minutes or whatever, or days even. And I think in the context of how we all find ourselves, you know, if you need that break, you know, I think it's really important now more than ever to acknowledge that and go, you know, look, if there isn't really a reason for me to get up immediately and respond to this threat immediately or this issue immediately, then it may be the most appropriate thing for me to actually, and the most resilient thing for me to actually look after myself and, you know, get back when it's appropriate.
Yeah, definitely. Valerie, Sam, anything to add there?
No, I think that was a really great explanation.
Yeah, Agree totally. You articulated it very nicely, Nicholas. I'm not even going to try and beat that. It was great.
So moving over to Valerie, there was a New York Times article about languishing. I've actually seen it shared a couple of times today on Instagram, and it's this sense of stagnation and emptiness that everyone's feeling in this never-ending cycle of lockdowns. And Sam, you're lucky, regional Victoria came out of severe lockdown today, so the rest of us are looking at you. It also doesn't help that we're stuck in a really bad global news cycle that compounds those feelings. It sort of feels like, you know, the bad news just keeps on coming. With your background in psychology and social work, can you describe what you think the red flags are when your resilience is really wavering?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to give a bit of a definition about resilience, but I think that we've had an awesome one from Nicholas. So that's fantastic. It was a good segue. Look, I think it's really important to think about what our warning signs are with regards to our stress language, because that's what you will see come up first and foremost versus resilience. Like we heard that definition about sometimes you need to take that break. But I think what's probably more helpful in this situation is what are your warning signs with regards to when your mental health isn't doing so well. And so I often refer to this as your stress language. So do you know what your stress language or warning signs are? So I'll ask that to everyone, and you can have a bit of a think about that in terms of what are your cognitions saying when you're stressed? What are your feelings doing? What are your behaviors? And sometimes what are those physical symptoms that you might be experiencing as a result of stress? And look, we all have them, and they're all our little warning signs that tell us when we need to stop and take a break. But often as founders, we push through and we think that's the norm and that we've got to keep going. So I think what I want to do is just share a little story with you, just to put it into context. So certainly with regards to my stress language, when that starts talking to me, it's when I'm often feeling overwhelmed. We heard that word languishing, that feeling of just meh. And when that presents itself, it's really difficult to focus. So when that's happening for me, what I start to notice with my behaviors is I actually start to rewrite my to-do lists. So that's one of my behaviors. And I also start to, obviously start to feel a bit tearful when I think, oh gosh, what's going on? So if I ignore that and don't do anything with that, then what starts to happen is I start to obviously feel a bit sad with that. And then my cognitions kick in. When my cognitions kick in, and not very nice, they're really negative thoughts. They're often on loop telling me how I'm not good enough. So you can imagine that compounded with feeling a bit meh, a bit tearful. It's not a good combination. And so these are my warning signs. And if I completely ignore that, which a lot of founders we do, we push through, we've got to find that next solution. We've got to find an answer to something that we're working on. And then what happens is your body says, hang on a minute, you're not listening to me. You're not taking that break. You're not listening to those red flags. I'm going to give you some physical symptoms here. And so for me personally, some of my physical symptoms at the height of being stressed and ignoring all my warning signs, I've actually experienced chest pain, so mimicking a heart attack, which was not great. And then also things like nose ulcers, and I get a few sort of digestive issues. So that's when I've ignored everything. So it's really, really important to know what your stress language is, so that they're your warning signs, they're your red flags to say, hey, take a break, recharge. And I think when you do get those physical symptoms, it's really important, firstly, to check them out, go see your GP, but also just to make sure that you do try and find space and time to take a break, and a real sort of switching off from technology, finding things that you can do that you can enjoy, that start to release those feel-good chemicals, so, get a hit of dopamine and serotonin and get those endorphins flowing through you, because that's what's going to help balance out some of those feelings and start to make you feel a little bit better and back on track. That's
fantastic. And I love that we've been given our first piece of homework for the night. Thanks for that, Valerie. Sam, you've been through some really daunting situations in the workplace that have required a lot of resilience. I'm thinking about the Royal Commission into banking, restructures, and more recently in your current role, the impact of school shutdowns and regional community lockdowns and the impact that's had on the families that are part of their Catholic education system. You're also an accredited resilience trainer. What does that involve, and how do you use that to build resilience in the workplace?
It's an interesting logo or title, isn't it? Resilience training. I was actually, through interesting going through Royal Commissions, and now after the Royal Commission into the Catholic Church, the whole shift in the change of the way Catholic education, Victoria, no schools report into a parish priest, but into a corporate entity. So significant change right now too, significant working in Catholic ed. Fascinating, actually. I think when I look back at my career, if we look at it for people who are, in startups as well as a leader, leading people through, really the key here for everything has been this uncertainty or change throughout. I like that you said 25 years. It's getting up closer to 30 years now of work experience, and even when I started uni to first job, ANZ 10 years, to consulting for 13 years, trying to find that, the uncertainty of when your next paycheck was going to come, your next client. Even having 4 kids under 4 in between all that. I think it's the change and the uncertainty that it has been probably the test. The overworking busy mind, the self-doubt through that. And so through at Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, I was fortunate enough to go through accreditation to become a resilience trainer to take 7,000 people through. So we actually trained 7,000 people across the bank in resilience skills. And what I loved about that was, one, the organisation took it seriously, that wellbeing, when our people, our employees are engaged and they're well, they perform better. There is a financial benefit of having well people working for you. That, I know I'm simplifying it. So I got to do that training with South Australian state government and a US company which was guys from the US Army and Navy who had been in Iraq. So they shared, very different stories to a corporate lens, which that's what I really loved. And what I learned too through that was, resilience is a skill that can be learned. It's not a natural part of psychologists in the room. Tell me if I've got that wrong. It can be learned. It's not part of your personality or your IQ. It's something that everyone can learn. Yes, not everyone has the capability to learn that easily, may need a significant amount of support, but it is a skill we can learn. So, things like mindfulness and gratitude were 2 of the top, skills, but there were another 8 skills. The growth mindset model, which I loved about. You can have a growth mindset in some parts of your life, but you can be very fixed in others, and just even being trying to assess where you are in any given situation, that self-awareness also helps. But, our ability to move, to eat well, to sleep, busy minds. What I learned from another psychologist that the bank got in was sometimes I can't sleep at night because I'm overthinking. I'm sure a lot of us have that play on our minds, but what I learned from that was, when that does happen now, I just accept it, because it will pass. Everything passes, good and bad. And so I might get up in the middle of the night and take a few notes, so catch up on sleep the next night. So that's really helped me. Just what was the other thing? There was a skill that I really liked that some of you may know around, they called it ETR, but there's an event, a thought, and then a reaction. But most people go event to reaction because they haven't thought about those biases, those thoughts that have created that reaction. And so through yoga and the breath as well, something happens. Maybe take a breath, and then your reaction might be slightly different. So when I did that training and my yoga teacher training, there was lots of parallels through thousands of years of yogi philosophy, and then applying it to modern science, which I thought was amazing. I don't even know if I've answered the question, but
no, I think you've given us some really fantastic insights into that. Sounds like it's awesome training, and you're so lucky that you've been able to do that. Nicholas, we've seen obviously some news over the last week that emergency mental health clinics are popping up all over Sydney. Lifeline's experienced its busiest days ever in the last 12 months, and it seems like everyone's capacity to support each other is starting to wear a little bit thin. Can you talk us through what impact the pandemic is having on our mental health and our ability to be resilient?
Yeah, look, I've thought about this a lot because there's a lot of news about this, and there's a lot of emphasis on, you know, the increased recognition of kind of insufficient mental health systems, you know, how our systems aren't, and this is true globally. You know, the reality sort of is, it's not just an Australian problem, it's a global problem, and that we don't have enough resources to help people with mental health issues. I think the reality is essentially, it's not just the pandemic. I mean, this is a problem that predates the pandemic, and I think the pandemic has exacerbated the problem. So for many people, there aren't enough resources out there. People are not necessarily sure what to do or where to go when they're really stressed or when they're really struggling. And I think, you know, we heard earlier from Valerie this, you know, that this sort of idea of kind of knowing your own internal cues. And I think we don't really learn in school, we don't learn as we're growing up to kind of be self-aware, to kind of recognize the signs and the indicators for ourselves when things are starting to take a turn, you know, when it's time for us to actually step out and do something about it. And so I think what's key, and where I think that's key in the context of it, and you sort of suggested, you know, in phrasing the question, Sarah, that, you know, people looking after other people. And I think that's one of the other keys about the pandemic, right, is that many people, in particular, I imagine people sort of tuning into this, are often in roles where they're responsible for other people. You know, if you're starting up a company, you're not only looking after yourself, you're probably looking after family, you're probably also looking after new employees, you've probably got responsibilities to people that are investing in you. So there's a tendency to sort of think, well, I have to look after all these other people as well as myself. And I think one of the first people that we often neglect is ourselves. And the reality sort of is, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of anyone else. And so I think that's one of the big realities in the context of the pandemic, I think, is that many people have been in contexts where there's just so many people in such dire need around us. And I think so many people are just been pushed beyond the fray and are just really struggling to figure out what they can do to cope. As I said, you know, many of people's sort of traditional coping strategies just no longer work. This is an unprecedented, potentially once in a lifetime event. And so we don't really know what to do with it. And kind of the things that most of us would normally do, getting together with friends, going out, you know, and playing a sport with a team or whatever, many of those things are no longer options. Uncertainty around life, you know, life is always uncertain, but at the same time, the amount of uncertainty that we face in our day-to-day lives at present is probably higher than it has been for most of us ever. You know, there's more uncertainty as to what's going to happen tomorrow. When are the borders going to open? What's life going to look like after all this resumes? And so I think you put all those things together and it sort of just massively exacerbates the mental health situation. People are just really struggling to figure out what to do. And so I think that's where some of these calls are coming from. I think a lot of it is, you know, you've taken people who sort of already really seriously needed help. You've taken a lot of people that were on the edge. You know, they might have been coping okay, but were, you know, they just got a little bit of an extra push and that pushed them over. And then I think you took a lot of people who were doing reasonably well and, you know, they just kept getting pushed. They kept getting pushed, you know, one lockdown, another lockdown, schools getting shut, childcare getting closed, you know, JobKeeper not getting extended, whatever it was for whatever the individual. I think it just was one hit after the other. And people's traditional strategies of kind of refilling the cup, you know, so to speak, of sort of kind of renewing themselves just no longer work. And so I think that's kind of where we find ourselves at, that people don't really know what to do or where to turn. It's just so unprecedented and so different than what we're used to that a lot of people just aren't sure how to cope with these things.
I think, I guess as a follow-up to that, I think one of the things that everyone on the call is probably interested in are what are the strategies that you all think that we can use to build resilience, and what do resilient leaders look like? Who wants to jump in first?
You want me to go?
Go for it, Sam.
I think as a leader myself, I constantly check in on this because I've got a team that are a little bit up and down as well. But I think there's this authenticity around where we're at too. So I'm pretty, and knowing your people, what motivates them, and probably knowing your people enough to know when they're maybe not right or they're off track. Especially with what Nicholas said too, it is even the most resilient people I know are starting to break a little bit at the moment, and knowing that is knowing your people well, I think is a first step for being a really good leader. I think I made some notes, and you know what, I can't even find them now. I've lost my track. But being genuine, I think a good leader, as Nicholas said, the uncertainty is greater than now, is being able to understand, listen, empathise, but also understand what workload people are having on and helping them prioritise that, and maybe how they achieve some of their goals. Being flexible, very hard in frontline roles too, but some sort of flexibility with your staff, of your employees. Just that care factor is what I think. Being able to jump in, roll your sleeves up, pretty practical stuff, I know, but I think at the end of the day, I think you're still human, and you don't have to be Superman every day as a leader. I think being slightly vulnerable is a good thing. I have very open conversations. I'm having a crappy day today, I'm going for a walk, or I have I think you have to role model good wellbeing strategies as a leader. Going for walking meetings, encouraging people. I had through the Shepparton outbreak, one of my team, she was on 24/7 to try and help the schools. And I said to her, take the day off. No one needs to know. Don't put a leave pass in. Just little things like that to show that you care. I think that makes a difference. From me.
Yeah, I echo what Sam was saying, and also what Nicholas was saying before. I think leadership and strategies to build resilience, it's the day-to-day stuff that's happening for people. It's the way that you're presenting yourself as a leader towards your team, asking those questions, checking in. Sam mentioned all of those amazing things that you would expect from a great leader, and they're the things that are going to support team members, really listening to them, hearing what's going on, and making any of those reasonable adjustments to hear what's happening, hear that everyone's at their threshold of coping at the moment, and doing things a little bit differently, and in turn that's also building the leaders' resilience themselves, because they're then developing a template. So resilience is all about having a template from something so that you can then have that happen to you, and then you can learn from that, and hopefully, as we heard from before, bounce back a bit quicker. But this is our template. We're starting this. We're setting this. We've never had this before. So all the things that we do are the gradual, incremental changes that we'll then look back at if we have another pandemic, and this will be where we're resilient.
In thinking about the current context, I mean, one of the things that I think is probably, I mean, if I had to pick anything as sort of the single most important thing that I think leaders can do in the current context is model good self-care. Because I think the reality is, and I've seen this a lot across a lot of different companies, a lot of different organizations, before the pandemic as well, but people talk a lot about well-being. There's a lot of language, there's a lot of emails, there's lots of programs, there's lots of seminars about well-being. And so people hear it, they'll hear about it, but are you actually communicating as the head of a company, the director of a company, a manager, that it's important? So are you demonstrating, do you take days off? Do your employees know that it's acceptable to take time to go for a jog, to meditate, to do whatever, restructure your diet, to ask them for help? And I think that there's a way in which essentially by you actually physically, saying, hey, I need help today. Normally you're the one that trusts me, but can I ask you for some help? Or you know what, I need to take a half day today because I need a mental health day. Some things are going on for me at home. I'm not going to get into the details. It's not your problem, but look, it's okay to take half day sometimes. And I think that modeling of behavior and showing people that it's okay to be human, just it sort of speaks volumes. You know, I think it'll speak louder than any program I think you can give your companies access to. Not to say you shouldn't, right? But I think the reality is, if you want them to use those programs, you have to show them that it's acceptable to use them. And I think sort of things like saying, you know, where companies sort of sometimes will give people these sort of additional offerings or programs, but people have to do it outside of work hours, or they have to do it during their lunch break. You know, let them do it during work hours. You know, tell people that it's, and go there yourself. You know, go to the workshop and seminar yourself. Show them how important these things are. And I think if you do that, it demonstrates to people that you value that and that you value them. And I think that just goes a huge way, and it'll return its value in spades, you know, in terms of what you give from yourself authentically and truly. I think people will then recognize that you genuinely care. And that also, there's even if you're faking it, even if you're sort of going, well, I'm trying to care for myself by demonstrating this so that you can care for yourselves, you're going to at some point be forced to look after yourself. And so you'll feel better, and your employees will feel better, and you'll all have a better working relationship. And as a result, you know, as we've heard, you know, you'll be aware of what's going on. You know, people will have the vibe will change, and people will have more respect for you, I think, in that context. And generally speaking, also the other common thing I say is sort of in this context, and I don't mean to sort of sound negative, and I don't want to encourage people to sort of aim low by any means, but I think we do have to lower our expectations a bit, to be really honest, in the current context. You know, I think we expect too much of people in this context, and we're asking people to do a lot of things. And, you know, most people are working from home, they're working in a setting they never have before. And so I think we have to just extend trust to people we work with, and just assume that they'll get the work done however they can. And if they can't, that they can tell us about it. And, you know, that trust will go both ways. You know, if you show people that you trust them, then hopefully they'll convey that trust back to you.
I think those are some really sage words of advice, particularly for people who are, I guess, in the early stages of starting their own companies and looking to, I guess, strategies for the future for, you know, their own HR practices. Valerie, you are a founder and have been involved with both MAP and TRAM programs. Is there anything specific to startup founders that we should be really conscious of with regard to resilience and wellbeing?
Well, I think I liked what Nicholas had to say about sort of potentially lowering expectations for people. And I think we need to potentially do that for ourselves as founders, because as founders, we probably have the highest expectations of ourselves compared to anyone else. And, you know, I'm not going to be the first one to say it, but founders, you know, we certainly have the odds stacked against us when we start a company and when we're trying to form one. And, you know, we do have that healthy level of optimism that sort of marries that up there. But I think one of the things I noticed pre-COVID with founders when I worked with them was that there were already underlying anxieties. People were feeling burnt out. There was constant worry. People even experienced sort of things like panic attack and obsessive behaviours. And I guess what I'm hearing now, and this was sort of touched on a little bit by Nicholas, is that those previous coping strategies that founders were putting in place are just not working anymore. So if someone would, you know, take a break, for example, mine's a bit of a binge on a UK soapie. Other people, it might be to read a novel. And normally what would happen is that would give you that hit of dopamine to make you feel good and be able to get back on with doing the work that you needed. But at the moment, we're expecting so much from that because we're so restricted in everything else that we can do, that actually at times it's just not delivering what it is that we need. And that's what was talked about before around those coping strategies that we would normally implement. They're just not working for us at the moment as well as they could. I think with regards to, I think it's quite pertinent to share a study I did in 2018 with founders, and it was quite relevant to what we're talking about here. And it was really about a pilot study to understand stress and the impact that had on founders and their ability to communicate, their ability to be sort of creative in their roles. And what it also found from founders, that's always interesting, isn't it? What it also identified is that there was a further complicating factor for founders with regards to their mental health and well-being, and that was around two beliefs that founders actually held. And this was common amongst the group of founders I worked with across sort of TRAM, MAP and other accelerators. And that was with regards to mental health and well-being, that founders had this they had two beliefs. It was a self-reliance, so that they thought that the problem that they had wasn't big enough to seek help. And then they had this self-belief that they should be able to fix it. And, if we had a broken arm or something like that, we wouldn't look at that broken arm and think, I should be able to fix that. Oh, it's not big enough to seek help. But yet when it comes to mental health, when it comes to issues or worries of the mind and things that are sort of stopping us progressing, we tend to feel that as founders, we can solve that. So these are also two beliefs that stopped founders from seeking help early. So I think it's really important to raise that, because we do have all these other compounding issues and factors going on at the moment. I guess one other part of that study highlighted a proactive approach. So we just heard about Nicholas saying, making sure that we're leading by example and not just telling people we've got these activities available, but actually engaging in them during the day with your team. For founders, this was about attending one-to-one sessions regularly. And that was really where they had a space to talk about their issues, where they could replenish, recharge. And what the pilot study found was that it decreased their stress and it increased their performance and well-being. And so that's about being proactive. It's about having those sessions regularly scheduled in at the same time each month, so that you can sort of get on top of those little issues before they escalate into something bigger and maybe a little bit more harder to resolve. So that's one strategy that founders and anyone really can take on board to look after their well-being.
Fantastic. That study sounds so interesting. Nicholas, I've got a question for you now. You're a bit of an expert on this mindfulness thing, and it's a word that we hear thrown around all the time, especially on Instagram. Can you talk us through what mindfulness is and, more importantly, what it isn't?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'd like to give a presentation, or I give whole sort of seminars and things on this particular topic, but I'll try to keep my answers short. I often talk about sort of the difference between what I would call big M mindfulness, which is whatever mindfulness might actually be, little m mindfulness, which is what I sort of most focus on, and hashtag mindfulness, which is, what you see on Instagram. And I think, look, so the idea of mindfulness, essentially, broadly speaking, and the most common definition used is one by John Kabat-Zinn, who sort of really popularized it. And he sort of says it's paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And so I think I like his definition broadly. I think it's a good one. It's sort of, the idea is that you're here, you're in the moment, you're paying attention to what's going on. You're not anticipating what's coming up. You're not recalling something that's happened. You're just dealing with whatever is with you here in the moment. And the way that you're doing that is intentional. It's not you felt you sort of accidentally happened into flow, like flow states. Everyone knows about flow states. They're great, but often they're not intentional. If anyone's ever played sports, flow states are sort of something that often just happens to you, and they're amazing when you get, or work even, you get into that flow and you get so much done, but it's not intentional. And so that's a big difference, I think, between, say, flow and mindfulness. Is mindfulness is intentional. You're setting out to sort of create it or cultivate it. So that's the attentional component. There's an element of it that this sort of non-judgmentalness, right? So then the idea is not that it's all okay, I'll just accept whatever happens. It's my work situation may be terrible and I'll just be comfortable with it and I won't try to do anything. It's more a recognition of, well, some things are going on in my life right now, and particularly in that moment when you're doing the practice, some thoughts are popping into my head, or I'm experiencing some moods or some aches or some pains in my body, and these things will pass. That there's an element of going, okay, well, what is this thing? And there's a curiosity and a willingness to explore it, and whatever, and sort of just trying to understand, well, what is this thing that I'm experiencing? That idea that we heard earlier of, there's a trigger, and there's a reaction, and it's sort of trying to create, mindfulness really is this wonderful tool to create more space between those two things. It gives you the opportunity, when something happens to you, to basically evaluate that something and then make a decision about, rather than just reacting really automatically, it helps you basically to go, how do I want to respond to this? Respond being the key word as opposed to react. And I think also, we heard earlier about sort of how we sort of notice sort of our stress, and that's another thing that mindfulness can do. It can help us to become self-aware, and so we can become much more aware about these small little things that our mind does. We get to know our mind really well. We get to know our patterns really well, and As we do that, we'll notice sort of subtle changes. We'll notice we get a bit more irritable, or we notice that we start to engage in more negative self-talk, or we'll notice that it's getting harder to fall asleep, or maybe we're snapping more at our partner, or, we're getting angry when our emails aren't replied to immediately. And, whatever it is, you'll start to notice those cues and you go, oh, wow, like I probably need to do something about it. And mindfulness sort of is something that can help you to catch that sooner and sooner. So you get closer to the thing that actually ultimately sort of wears you down, and you're potentially able to deal with it before it wears you down. Now, what it's not is it's not a silver bullet, right? It's not something that fixes everything. It's a concept, it's an idea. I like to think of it as a process. It's a practice. It's something that you have to do. You have to do it over and over and over again, and you have to fail well at it. Right? You're going to try to be present. You're going to try to be in the moment. You're going to try to be non-judgmental, and you're going to fail at it. And that's kind of the point, right? It's in that failing to try and do it that you learn, how to be better at it next time. And you give yourself a bit of a break as well. Like, okay, well, I didn't do the best this time, but I learned something from it. And so hopefully next time when I do this thing, I have enough awareness now, sort of how events unfolded, how my own reaction, kind of came about, and I can sort of choose to hopefully get a little bit of extra space and do it differently the next time. But when I say it's not a silver bullet, I think, and this is the key to kind of the hashtag mindfulness, don't assume that it'll fix all your problems. Don't assume that it's automatically going to give you six-pack abs or make you look wonderful in a bikini. It's not going to magically transport you from your home in lockdown to some beautiful, wonderful beach. And I think similarly, sort of the way that the practice works, or at least the way that I think about, mindfulness-based practices, is it's all about just being in your life however it is. It helps you to be fully in your life. It's not about going somewhere else. It's not about being on some lovely setting or being removed from your life as it is. It's about finding ways to actually navigate or negotiate the situation that you find yourself in, wherever that is.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Nicholas. That's really fantastic. Sam, as a yoga and meditation teacher, I'm sure that you implement a lot of mindfulness in those practices. I'm interested to hear how you started off on that journey and how that influences your well-being at work and in your day-to-day.
So I'll just be really open and honest. In my late 20s, I was a little bit angry, had some anger management issues, and so I started doing yoga. I don't know why. I just decided, I can't even remember why I did it. So come from a very emotionally explosive family. So I started yoga then, and the power of the breath, amazing. So just to slow the mind down as well and help with my reactions. And then 4 kids under 4, moved to Bendigo when the twins were 8 weeks old. So, massive change in my life, all that sort of stuff. And then about, and then nearly 8 years ago, a marriage breakdown. And so and I hadn't been doing a lot of regular practice with yoga, but it was the first thing I went back to is my yoga. And then I went, and it became a daily practice. And then in 2017, I did my teaching, which was amazing. It was life-changing in many ways. And I'd done the resilience training maybe a year before I started doing my yoga teacher training. So there was just so many crossovers. It was brilliant. And so now for me, that power, the mindfulness, yes, we can sit down and meditate. I do meditate every day. It's a myth that meditation is all about an empty mind, just in case anyone thinks they've tried it and they can't do it, so they're never going to do it. The thoughts come in and out, and so I've learned to let all that go and let the thoughts come in, and then when I realise that, I go back to the breath. So in the workplace, the power of the breath is just tremendous for me. And I have, I've had people have serious things going on in their life, and I've been able to just get them first to slow down their breath. And as a mother of 4 young adults, we talk about that. And if anyone needs a good breathing technique, besides the deep belly breathing, alternate nostril breathing, look it up, Google it. It's amazing breath if you are really anxious to bring instant calm. So just that mindfulness, trusting the flow of life, balances are really good to be mindful too and to be present, because you can't have a busy mind when you're trying to do a balance. That's another little tip I can give you. But, you know, that has helped me as a leader, as a peer, now on an executive team. My reactions are different. I've just learned to be grateful and savor the positivity as well, and realize that people's reactions aren't really about me. I think that's some of the learning I've learned as well, that it's nothing personal when you're making a decision. But I've worked hard. I've worked really hard to get to 53 and have some really good strategies in place. And I'm very, I accept that people have different strategies for learning, and it takes time, and patience is a virtue. And so I don't preach. I don't expect everyone to think like me, and I still continue to learn. So that's probably how I play it on a daily basis in the workplace. But I don't think you can separate work and home. So for me, especially now,
no one can separate work and home.
It's all in the same place. So and that's as a leader too, you know, you can't leave your personal life at home and not bring it to work, and vice versa. So I think as leaders we have to recognize that it's all part of being a human.
Absolutely. We do have some questions coming in on the chat from the audience. So my wonderful colleague Abby Middlemiss is going to jump in as well and ask some of those questions.
Hi everyone. So we've got a question from Celine. She says, for someone who has a sensitive, anxious personality, do you recommend taking Prozac to become more resilient?
And I think so. I mean, I'm not a physician, and I don't think anyone here is. So I mean, certainly that's not something we could advise about. As a psychologist, if a client came to me asking that, I would say essentially, unless you've got a diagnosis and you've been provided a diagnosis by a physician that sort of indicates that you should be taking that medication, then you know it's probably not a good way of going. So you know, if you're not dealing with a mental health condition, you know, then it's not something you should be seeking out.
Great, thank you. And we've got another question from Divya. She says, Sam and Valerie spoke of resilience from leaders' perspective, but what about from the perspective of a junior team member, specifically if they are an introvert and don't voice their anxieties easily?
Good question.
I think the tips and strategies that we were mentioning with regards to leaders, I think all of us are leaders in one way or another, whether you're a junior member in a team or whether you're the CEO, there's always someone that will be looking at you, and it's always about just doing those incremental day-to-day things that you can in order to bring about change. I think there's probably a little bit of a separation in terms of maybe not being the person to speak up. That's probably looking at things a little bit differently around maybe some tips and tricks around when and how you can speak up, because if it's anxiety provoking, then there can be a little bit of work that can be done around there so that you feel comfortable in responding, and then there can be incremental ways that you do that as well so that you feel comfortable, and then that's going to feed into building your resilience so that you're not feeling as anxious when you want to provide some feedback or information. I know it's probably a little bit vague, but Nicholas, did you have anything you wanted to add on that, or Sam?
Well, I don't just think that you're right. I mean, essentially, there's not. I don't think there's anything fundamentally different sort of about, you know, looking after yourself in a senior versus more junior role. I think, I mean, one thing I guess I would say that I think is particularly helpful, I mean, largely regardless of where you fall on the rung of society, because, you know, unless you're the president of, you know, one of the world major powers, there, you know, and even then you're always going to have someone above you. So I think the reality sort of just, you know, the old adage of, you know, essentially try to know what you can control and what you can't, and, you know, sort of try to manage the things that you can control around you, and figure out what you can control and sort of what you can do about it. I think that's one of the biggest things, sort of, if you find yourself sort of stuck somewhere down the rung, that there will be ways that you can influence the people around you that can make a huge difference, and there's certainly ways that you can act to kind of help yourself and those individuals, but there may be other aspects of how the company operates or your environment operates that you have nothing that you can do about. And in that case, you then have to make a choice. Is there a way that you can cope with that, or is it time to leave?
I was just going to say something similar, Nicholas. I think potentially that when the balance of power is very different and you don't have the skills, and potentially the leader may not be compassionate or caring or interested, I think, yeah, it's based on what you said, Nicholas, that, and then I would also say that you may need to get support from other people outside the organisation or colleagues, because that's the tricky thing I see. And if the leader doesn't understand their own reactions and impact on others, that could be it could be that decision. I need to maybe just leave. I say it like it's easy. It's not. But the skills, everything is still. Yeah, I agree with Valerie. It's still the same skills. And life. Like you said, failing, Nicholas, something. Sometimes we fail to learn. So I don't think it's a silver bullet that wherever you are to get those skills, and also depends on who you're working with, makes a big difference.
Great answers, guys. Thank you. We have another question from Celine. She says, how do you combat the stigma that people with mental health issues, etc., are lazy?
I would certainly hope that that's changed. I think it has a lot globally. I know that it still is the case in certain areas and in certain sectors. And I think on the one level, it's about information, it's about awareness, it's about recognizing sort of, where mental illness comes from and what we know about it, recognizing sort of that these are acknowledged disorders, that there's a sort of strong biological and genetic basis to them, as well as many other features. But I also think it's, what's been spoken about earlier, that fundamentally sort of acknowledge that, just like any other medical condition, if you had a broken arm or a heart condition, you wouldn't be expected to fix it yourself. You wouldn't necessarily be expected to sort of, heal yourself or do heart surgery on yourself. And so, similarly, sort of you need to sort of, or one needs to sort of just recognize that these are not sort of self-fixing issues. And as far as sort of, working with others who sort of may have those opinions, that's a challenge. I think, it may be worthwhile sort of to pull in people from the outset again, as we heard earlier, where Sam sort of suggested, if you're working with someone who's above you that sort of has this particular position that you're weak or you can't overcome it, then you may need to draw on sort of resources support sort of outside of the organization to really help inform that person, or to work with you and at least encourage you or facilitate that discussion on your behalf.
Wonderful, thank you. This next comment is from Fanny. She says, some people feel bad when they decide to take a step back from their routines, knowing that they have responsibilities and expectations that they have to meet. Would you please share with us any insights on avoiding self-blame in the process of developing resilience?
I think that's a great question, and I think that where that resonates, I guess, a little bit with me is I take a mental health day every second Friday, and have implemented that since I started my company, and I think with taking that time off, and like yourself, you've mentioned that you need some space and time. It's about a little bit of self-talk, and maybe Sam will have some tips, but it's about just acknowledging that if you don't take that time to stop and have that moment to yourself, stay in your PJs all day, whatever it is, not do the ironing, not do something, just put an auto out of office for emails, whatever it is you need to do, that's the time for you that's going to give you the ability to recharge and to be able to pick back up again the next day and do the things that you need to do. So it's really, sometimes I know I personally sometimes have to remind myself, this is the day, this is my time, this is my recharge, and have to remind myself of, I have, you know, there are things to do, but if I don't do this, I won't be able to keep going. So perhaps some of those little affirmations for yourself as well might help keep the guilt at bay.
I'll just add a little yogi quote on that. Often we'll say, you know, come out of your thinking minds into your feeling body, and through the power of the breath and just sitting and just listening to your body and letting yourself feel what you feel. I think it's a powerful little piece to do, just to allow yourself to, if you feel crap, let it be, feel it, rest, then you heal, and then you rise. Now, sometimes that can be in a short span, sometimes it needs a longer time to heal and rise. But you know, you just go back to the breath first and let yourself just feel. Easier said than done, I know. Busy mind, monkey mind, as we say. That's the power of the breath.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we've probably got time for just one more question, so I'll just get to the next one. Kritika says, not sure if there is an answer for this, but is there a way to measure resiliency physiologically, and is there a science behind it?
That one's out of my league in terms of if there's a science behind it. Is anyone else on the panel?
I mean, yes and no. It's a tough question, you know, in the sense that it depends on what you're looking for. You know, as we talked about, sort of, you know, with a term like resilience or mindfulness, it can mean lots of things. You know, at the end of the day, sort of, I guess I always ask this question sort of when people sort of pitch research project ideas or sort of want to work with me, you know, well, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you want to know? And I would say the same thing if I were consulting or if I were working with a student who is designing a research project. You know, because I think at the end of the day, is if you're looking for some kind of objective external indicator, you know, that sort of suggests that, you know, you're sufficiently resilient, or if you think that you're going to find some target, you know, that will kind of verify that for you, you're probably not. You know, and so I think it's really just about going, well, what is it that you want to know you can do, and how do you kind of develop that confidence that you can do it? I don't, you know, my position would be, there's no single measure, like biological or physiological measure, that will tell you how resilient you are in the way that you actually want to know that. You know, you're more than sufficiently resilient as you are, and there are steps that you can take now to kind of act on what you already possess and have. You don't need something, you know, you don't need a Fitbit or a smartwatch or, you know, an EEG or something to tell you that you can be more resilient, or in fact that you become sufficiently resilient. It's a work in progress, and you know, I think we don't learn in life how to suffer and fail well. And I think particularly, I would imagine for this group, you know, people are used to success, people are used to doing well and excelling at everything. And so failure is particularly acute and hard. But I mean, I think, at least in my experience, that's when you learn some of the most important lessons, is when things don't work out for you.
Fantastic. And we also have had a comment in the chat about Professor Angela Duckworth's work on grit. There's actually a couple of interesting Freakonomics episodes on that, if anyone's keen to check that out. I think that is all we have got time for this evening. I want to extend a very big thank you to Valerie, Samantha and Nicholas for joining us on the panel tonight. Everyone's got 3 pieces of homework. The first one is to do a little bit of journaling and think about what their stress signs and their stress language looks like. That's from Valerie. From Samantha, it is alternate nostril breathing. And if you're particularly keen, go and have a look at some other yogic breathing, or perhaps even try a yoga class if you haven't already. And from Nick, I'd love everyone to go and read at least one article that's in the media that Nick has been involved in. There are also, if you find his website, there are a bunch of different panels and masterclasses and things like what we're doing tonight that he has spoken on that are super interesting, and I would have watched every single one, but I just did not have time to before tonight's masterclass to prepare. There's definitely something that everybody can take away from tonight's panel. So a massive thank you from all of us. Thank you everybody who sat in on the call and contributed some really fantastic questions. If you're interested in attending any more of our events, you can sign up to the MAP and TRAM newsletters. That'll keep you in the loop. All right, stay safe, stay sane, everybody. We'll get out of the lockdown together. We'll be resilient. See you all later.
See you.
Take care. Nice to meet you all.
Bye.